Welcome to OpenHive.JS, the podcast for all things JavaScript. We are your hosts, Matteo Collina and James Snell.
If you write documentation out and you are communicating in your opinion, but the person on the other end is not really understanding what your documentation is saying, then you have actually failed at the very basic, which is passing information.
For this episode, we are sitting down with Kenigbolo Meya Stephen, engineering lead at BCaster, front-end architect at Howspace, tech speaker, and community manager at Code Afrique. Kenigbolo talks to us about the role of documentation, developing technical skills for aspiring developers, and mentoring.
When a piece of documentation is written, the first point of call is to give it to someone who is not technical at all and try to see if they can make sense of it. You don't expect them to understand everything you've written, but can they read through and get a glimpse of understanding?
Let's get into it. You are listening to OpenHive.JS from Nearform.
Welcome to OpenHive.JS, our podcast on all things JavaScript with Nearform guests. I'm James Snell, and I'm joined here today with my colleague Matteo Collina and our guest Kenigbolo Meya Stephen for a chat about documentation, mentoring, creating opportunities for new developers to grow and thrive. It should be a fantastic conversation. Hello, Kenigbolo. Thank you for joining us.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
All right. So, Kenigbolo, why don't you, introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm Kenigbolo Meya Stephen. I work as an engineering lead at BCaster as well as a front-end architect with Howspace. I work primarily on JavaScript, but also dive into whatever is necessary. I like to code. It's a hobby and a job. But in my spare time, I spend more time with my family. I either play golf or I play football. Americans call it soccer, I believe. And generally just try to make the world a better place and enjoy special time with my family. That's pretty much about it for me. Yeah.
By the way, it's definitely football. Okay, I am with you. Let's call it the European way. I don't know. I'm sorry. Soccer, whatever.
I'm with you. Football is soccer is football.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, that's what it is. Okay, it's yeah, that's even that's the same even in Italy, by the way. So hey, we know a thing or two about that. Not that I'm interested in it, but whatever. So fantastic. So we're chatting about documentation. We wanted to chat a little bit about the role of documentation and how it can maybe shape the story of a project or for an open source project, a private project, or whatever. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I have quite strong feelings about documentation, and I think that it's a vital and important part of every project. I usually tell my team that documentation is like the eye into your project. It helps you keep track of your entire application and the entire project that you're working on. And as an added advantage, it also drastically improves the quality of the software that you build. Documentation is an important thing. It's not just speculative software, but pretty much do everything. So if you say, for example, you go to IKEA to buy a bed, you definitely will want to go through the instructions on how to set this bed up. If you have very bad instructions, the chances that you will screw up with setting the bed up are quite high. And this is pretty much the same for most appliances that you will need to get. You will still figure out the same thing, that you need to go through some kind of manual or look through some kind of instruction to get it set up and to use it and to get the benefits, and also how to troubleshoot. This is the same thing when you come to software. So in terms of software development, documentation plays that important role with regards to being the eye into your application, helping you keep track of your entire application, not just the final product, but also the development process as well. And it's also, it works in such a way that it helps you maintain a certain quality, which in some cases can be said to be debatable in quote. But I think that the main focuses, in my opinion, are centered around helping you create a software that is maintainable and also easy to transfer in terms of handover with regards to projects or in terms of just sharing knowledge base amongst developers. Yep.
One of the things that I have seen being most problematic, one of the most problematic things that I've seen a lot of developers or a lot of people that are in our field is the lack of good writing skills. So I've struggled with this myself for a long time, not being a native English speaker, but there is a lot of people that um, are not great at writing, they're not great at expressing hard topic and technical topics in with words. And it's for a lot of time, a lot of people say, well, it's just writing. Why should I spend time in improving this? And it's also very hard on the other end, because it's they get how do you improve your writing skills if you are a junior developer or a senior developer, and this is one of the things that it's kind of blocking your career for progression. So um, I don't know. What's your opinion, folks?
Personally, I feel that it's a skill that is, in my opinion, quite undervalued in our industry, in tech in general, and which by this I mean technical writing. I believe that technical writing is just as important as actually knowing how to code. Of course, there can be language barriers, which almost every native speaker would face if they have to write documentation in, for example, my local language called Ijaw, or if you have to write in Finnish, for example. If you're not a native speaker of these languages, you would have the same challenges. However, we need to understand that documentation is a form of communication. And like I mentioned in one of my talks earlier on this year, uh, communication is a two-way street. So there's the person who is serving and there's the person who's receiving. If you write documentation out and you are communicating in your opinion, but the person on the other end is not really understanding what your documentation is saying, then you have actually failed at the very basic, which is passing information. So, whereas technical writing skills can be quite challenging, I think most of the times the barrier is the lack of effort put into learning the skill. And this is because, in a lot of cases, developers see documentation as either less important or more of a post coding activity that can be done at any time. And as we all know, when you do procrastinate documentation, it always comes back to bite you in the butt. So this can be a challenge, yes, but I believe there are a lot of resources online that could help you improve your technical writing. Now, as a matter of fact, what I do with my team is when a piece of documentation is written, the first point of call is to give it to someone who is not technical at all and try to see if they can make sense of it. You don't expect them to understand everything you've written, but can they read through and get a glimpse of understanding, a general, even if it's a small overview of what you're trying to say? Some people say, but it's a technical documentation. Why are you giving a technical documentation to someone who's not technical? The point is, yes, it's a technical documentation, but you're trying to communicate. Now, if the other person on the other end doesn't understand anything at all, it means it's not the technicality of what you're writing, it's rather your writing skills, and that's something you need to improve on. And there are resources that can help you. Also, engineering leads, in a lot of cases, do not invest so much into teaching or helping developers gain important skills in technical writing, because in a lot of cases we feel like this is not important for engineers. However, I strongly believe, in my personal opinion, that technical writing skills are just as important as knowing how to actually code.
I totally agree with you.
Yeah. I don't think you're going to get any argument from either of us. As you're talking through all that on the importance of writing good documentation, I was just laughing because I was looking at the Node documentation, and I'm looking at the file system module that we have right now, and there's one function, the fsync. There's a synchronous and asynchronous version, and the only documentation that's in this for fsync it's asynchronous fsync. And then when you look at the synchronous version, it just says synchronous fsync. it doesn't tell you what it does, what it's for, where you'd use it, how you'd use it. It literally just says,
It's an F sync. Come
and
on.
that's it. It's just like, I mean,
How wouldn't you know what is an F sync, James?
exactly. You know, and it just really goes back to that point. You know, it's a lack of effort, a lot of part where it's just kind of like this is a chore. I don't really want to do it, but I have to have some documentation, and so here it is. And that's the user-facing documentation. You go back to the source code, there's none. There's no documentation on these. You know, so if somebody's, another developer is going to come along later on and try to figure out what the heck is going on, all right, they have nothing they can really go on. So yeah, just again, have to really just agree with you on everything you were saying there about it's a skill. You have to exercise it, and just as much as writing code. If you're not putting as much focus and energy into your writing as you are your coding, then you're definitely doing something wrong.
Well, I just wanted to say that we, from the beginning of this year, we have started to work at Nearform. We started to work with a technical writer. Yeah, thank you, Tracy. You're fantastic, and you have corrected so much of my stuff and so much of the stuff that my teams have written so far. So hey, you have been a game changer in how we work. So hey, thank you.
So, Kenigbolo, one of the things, I mean, you've obviously done a tremendous amount of thought around documentation. And I was wondering, in terms of what elements make for good documentation, keeping in mind that there are different audiences, what might be good for an end user is different than, what's going to be good for a new developer coming into your team. Have you really thought about kind of what those key elements are? Like what is what should be the key goal of the documentation for each of those audiences?
Yeah, so generally, I think there's the word we like to use a lot, which is it should be easy to read. In my opinion, easy is totally subjective and not something you can actually measure. So I wouldn't say one of the qualities which a lot of people like to use is that documentation should be easy to understand. Understanding as well is also subjective. I would say one of the key elements for making your documentation usable, let me use the word usable, is a proper structure. So if I come to your docs page, uh, can I easily find what I need to find? I think that's a core part for me. And then I use the word easily, which again is quite subjective in this case. But when I come to a documentation page and I need to find, say, for example, fsync, do I have a search bar that I can type fsync into, and that's going to take me to exactly what I want? When I come to a documentation, and now depending on the kind of documentation, say an open source project, can I easily, again, easily being subjective, go through the setup instructions and get it up and running, regardless of the system I'm using? That's also one. But again, it's I think for me, it's all about structure. A well-structured documentation gives the end user a straightforward path, regardless of if the end user is someone who is actually using it as a client or this is someone who is internal. When you have a proper structure, it gives it, in my opinion, a straightforward path. So, for example, internally, we have a rule of thumb that every documentation page for internal projects, regardless of if it's a monorepo or not, should always, in every case, start with detailed description of what is actually needed to run that project. So if a project requires a specific version of NPM, a specific version of Node to actually run, the important parts that are required should. So after your general introduction about what the project does, I think the next thing will usually be for people to want to get started with it. In your getting started instructions, having that information is also vital. So, like I mentioned, structure, a general overview of what the project is all about, and then followed by a structure that explains how to get started, what is needed, of course, with as clear as possible grammar. And I think, furthermore, a good idea is to actually use the possibility for syncing. So, a lot of documentation you go through, you end up seeing everything chunked on one page. And speaking from experience, as someone who teaches a lot of young developers, when they get to a documentation page and they see a large bunch of text, usually they get scared. They feel like they are unable to assimilate all of it. And it becomes more complicated if they go further and see something like, let's use the phrase, to get started, simply do this. And they try it on their computer and it doesn't work. They end up questioning themselves, like, am I good enough if it says I should simply do this and I can't get it working for me? So I think there's certain elements. There's the structure, and then there's the grammar, the lexicon structure of the grammar that you use as well.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I just everything you're saying there, I just keep going back to just how awful the node docs are. if we're using structure as a metric, avoiding large walls of text, not going through kind of the motivation for why things are there, why you should use them, all those kind of things. It just we fail across the board in these in the node documentation. So it's definitely critical. Now you mentioned there in training up new developers, and I know that's something that you've also spent quite a bit of time on doing. What are some of your experiences there in terms of kind of what things that within a project whether it's documentation or other practices kind of make it most difficult for a new developer to kind of come into it? I've been doing this for 20 plus years. I know Matteo's been doing it for a while. A lot of times we can very easily lose sight of kind of that new developer experience. So it's hard, right?
Oh, James, that's a super nice question.
Yeah.
I don't remember learning to code.
Right.
That's my problem. So I can't teach somebody to code. I don't remember learning to code. So
Yeah.
well, I don't know. So what's your experience, Kenigbolo?
Yeah. So with regards to that, I think a lot of the times, I think I will just try to remember. I probably have mentioned this at JSConf, the last JSConf EU, that so especially in the JavaScript community, we create barriers to entry unintentionally, and a lot of times it's things as straightforward as the way our documentations come across. So in the past 3 or 4 years, since 2017, I spent a lot of time teaching young developers, mostly people who come from a non-technical background. They have no prior experience about coding, and getting them into tech by teaching them basics of software development and what they need to know to get their foot into the door. One of the challenges I noticed with regards to how they assimilate documentation is, people generally, especially new developers, generally want to read the documentation, and they want to go through the documentation and follow the steps that they see. In a lot of cases, they find it impossible to make sense of any of these steps. Now, I could pull out a documentation to show this, but again, I do not want to make this seem like a special attack on any community within any specific community within the JavaScript audience. But some very basic things like, let me clone this. Let me clone this in an hour of something that it's not known, so no one actually understands what particular documentation I'm talking about. But imagine if you have to teach a class, and whilst teaching, you need to make reference to a specific method that you are actually using. And you go to the definition of this method, say it's use something or do something, as the case may be. And within the documentation definition down there, you're reading it out to your audience, but you're also understanding that what you're reading is not really making any sense to you, in the sense that, yes, this is what it does, this is what it should do, but how does it do this? There is really no information. So I say, if you take this and put this here, it will do this. Okay, but how does it do it? I have no idea. And you take a young developer who is actually curious. He goes to the documentation, he copies it and pastes it, and it doesn't work. Now, it doesn't work. It might be because he's not using it properly. However, the documentation is not really saying how this should be used. It's just saying this is what it does. It doesn't explain. It doesn't give details. I'm trying to be as subtle as possible here. It doesn't give enough details into what this does. So if I use it incorrectly, I start doubting if what I've read is correct. However, I have no idea that I'm using it incorrectly because I don't really have concrete examples. And this is another fundamental part that I hope a lot of people who write technical doc would try to improve on. When you fail to provide examples for things, you create a situation where it can easily be abused. And for young developers who are learning stuff, if you do not have instructions, if you do not assume that everyone is a newbie when writing your documentation and that everyone does not really understand what you're saying, you create a situation where young, like not young in terms of experience wise, actually try to dig into your documentation and then misuse things in ways they shouldn't, or use things that do not work, and then they start questioning the ability. However, it's just a lack of proper instruction. So there have been certain cases like this. I also had the workshop quite recently where I had to reference docs from a quite popular JavaScript project as well. And it actually ended up that the docs were not clear because the description of what was in there did not necessarily explain what it should be used for. And I ended up in a situation where I had to serve as an intermediary to this documentation for the workshop I was giving. Now, imagine if I wasn't the one delivering this workshop and they had to learn on their own. They get there and they would get stuck. So it's about the language and also presentation in general.
To be honest, I've always seen the documentation as poor every single time I was checking something out. Like when I see a project with fantastic documentation, I'm really thrilled. But most of that are just poor. And it's what I've done all this time to learn almost everything was, well, yes, the trivial thing, I can find it in the docs, but most of the time I end up reading the source code of what I'm using to understand how it should be used, or read their tests and so on. So, and I've seen a lot of I've been doing this all of my career, and it's I see a lot of people coming fresh in the industry, not reading the code of the libraries that they're using, and I find this a little bit puzzling in my head. So
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Matteo. I think a lot of new engineers do not dive into the source code, and that's actually true. But again, there are also some reasons that could actually there are also some reasons to that as well. So I could for example make the excuse for a few of my students that JavaScript is not as JavaScript in a lot of cases can be written to be so clear that it could read as English, and can be written to be so poor that even when a library is popular, you probably still would not be able to make sense of it.
Yeah, I think we've all encountered plenty of those.
I think I maintain them all, but whatever. I'm just, I'm probably culprit of a lot of those bad badly written, not easy to read code. I'm really using writing. I love writing clever code.
Well, anything in the Streams API in Node, I would never send someone to go read that code to figure out what it's doing without giving them some prep.
By the way, nobody knows.
No,
Like there are only at this point in time, there are only maybe 5 or 6 or 10, maybe 10 people that understand that code base, and 2 of them are active in maintaining it. And it's just such a big barrier of entry for anybody to coming in and understanding even to have a fix that is, super problematic. It's not documented. It's very poorly documented. It was never documented from the start, and we've done, from my point of view, a really good job in documenting what is there, but still not, nowhere near stuff to be useful at all. And that's very bad. So I know. It's just hey.
The other distinguishing thing that I've seen here is it's one thing to be able to describe what something does, in a very technical sense. It's something else entirely to be able to take somebody through the journey of how to learn what it's doing and why, and kind of the steps for getting from A to B. A lot of technical documentation just focuses on the B, right? The end results. This is what this thing is. This is all the complexity, everything else, and it still ends up assuming quite a bit of knowledge that a new developer may not have. I think this is, going back to your earlier point, kind of about, giving it to somebody, giving that documentation to somebody who is not technical. Are they able to make heads or tails of it, or are there so many technical concepts in there that just are assumed and unexplained that you're just kind of using as a throwaway? I think it's absolutely critical. So, I'm just checking our time. We're actually doing, really well. It's been a fantastic conversation. So you've been a developer, but from what I understand, you've been moving into management more here recently. What's been your experience there, and kind of where are things going for you?
It's been I'd say it's been a roller coaster. It's a totally different world entirely. I think being an individual contributor for a long time, and then moving into managing teams and working as an architect changes a lot of things with regards to how you approach code. I think one of the biggest changes for me has been understanding how important it is to see the bigger picture as opposed to having those quick deliveries. I remember Matteo once said, not too long ago actually, on Twitter, never trust an architect who doesn't code. And I like
Absolutely.
I liked that tweet a lot because it's true, and a lot of the projects I have actually taken have had architects who have been disconnected from coding a long time, and I've seen the adverse effects it had on it. So I think for me, the important part of transition is understanding when to delegate and understanding when you need to step in. It's been a constant. I think in early 2018, it was a bit of a difficult task for me, understanding that I need to sometimes delegate, and then I need to know when to step in, because being an IC and engineering lead were a bit two different things. I was used to delivering stuff, writing code, making sure it works, and making sure my tests pass. But that was it. Deliver the task at hand. Does it fit into the project that we're working on? And that was it. And now now I have to focus more on both the short term and then the long term goals, the effects of every single thing we do. It also means I am actually in the position between the engineers and management to understand what we go through, because I'm still a fundamental part of the engineering team. I still consider myself a software developer who is hands-on and likes to code. So I act like a bridge between both, and it's actually shown me, I think a fundamental part, it's shown me that if you have bad managers, your career is going to take a wrong turn. I think that's something that something that I resonate with, having been someone who has experienced that before. So I strive to help the team be the best they can, and I think it's important to understand that a lot of times people from another perspective, that's from outside, they always see management or being an engineering lead as being the sole figurehead. However, I think another thing I discovered was it's more about the team. You're not a good manager if the team doesn't excel. So it's never about you. It's always about the team that you lead.
No, that's absolutely excellent point. I have often in my own management stuff, haven't managed a lot of a large team for a long time, but I view it as my job to let them succeed and give them as much credit as is absolutely possible. I'm still going to be writing code, but if I'm not actively learning from them and celebrating their successes, then I'm just absolutely failing at what I'm supposed to be doing.
I'm swamped, so I'm not even entering this topic. Like I've recently passed over to the dark side, and I love the cookies, by the way. And it's no, it's actually very interesting and very rewarding, especially when you can deliver a lot more now. But then your mistakes now, if you make a mistake now, this will impact real people. So just not just code. So yeah, they come first.
Yeah, without question.
Yeah, I think it's another fundamental part, the decision making part. You're as an IC, you're never really in the spotlight. So your manager always takes the blame for whatever happens, regardless. So every decision you make when you move to management, every decision you make has an impact, and you basically always need to double think and triple check because it has an impact, and it's always going to be positive or negative anyway. So um, you want to try to be on the right side. Also, you want to also keep the engineers happy and productive. And then there's management who, in every case, have expectations that need to be met. So it's like I said, it's been a roller coaster. It's an interesting one, but I think I maybe because I also spent a lot of time teaching and enjoyed seeing these young engineers get jobs and get into tech. I guess it's maybe the part of management I enjoy. Helping people and helping the team become the best they can. Yeah.
No, that's fantastic. We are coming up to pretty much close to the end of our time here. But there's one final thing I wanted to ask you about. I noticed in your Twitter profile you mentioned the Code Afrique. I was wondering if you could give a little bit of background on what that organization is and what your involvement is.
Yeah, sure. So in 2017, I was finishing my master's in software engineering, and I was living in Estonia then. Of course, I made up my mind I was not going back to London for obvious reasons, and luckily it's been justified. But towards that period, I realized that we had a lot of black folks in Estonia who were skilled, had done their masters, had done the bachelor. Some of them had finished their PhDs, but when getting jobs, of course, due to a lot of reasons that I don't want to go into, it could sometimes be due to language barrier or due to other reasons that are well known about different places in Europe. And I decided with a couple of friends who had graduated as well to start this Code Afrique. And what we did was to get this group of underrepresented folks into a classroom, have a weekend intensive training for them. Luckily, at that time, the Tallinn University of Technology gave us a lab. So we were given a lab at Mektori, I believe, which is an innovation hub at the Tallinn University of Technology, which had computers, and we started teaching there. We started with a class of about 30. Of course, along the way, about 10 people dropped. And then kind of trickle down because, of course, in a lot of cases, not everyone gets on board. But we kept going. And we finished with the first batch. A couple of them got jobs, and we started doing it as a quarterly program. So every 4 months we have a new set, a couple of people, two, three, four. But in the last, I think, sometime in 2018, I was lecturing at the Tallinn University of Technology as well, and it was interesting to see that some of my students who were actually in Code Afrique were also in the class that I was actually teaching, and we just kept moving, myself and my friends. It was myself, Victor, who has a master's in software engineering from Tartu, and also Sunday, who also has the same master's in software engineering from Tartu. They're both in Canada now, so sometime in 2008, we all left Estonia, and ever since we've been running it remotely. I've been having every cohort. I've been having 3, 4 people, mostly so I can focus on them and dedicate my time to them. And in general, it's been a success. I can say we've had 80% of the people who went through our trainings like full time and finished. 80% of them have jobs. One of them at the moment, if I recall correctly, is working in Germany with a huge consulting company, and one just moved to Austria as well. Yeah.
Very nice. No, it sounds like a fantastic organization in a fantastic way of just kind of providing that service for that community. Now, I know you mentioned when we were talking before, we started recording and stuff. You haven't been quite as involved here recently because of new family.
Yeah, I discovered I was going to be a father.
Congrats.
So I started shifting responsibilities a little bit. And I do have someone, Fortunate Mutunda, who is going to be running the program. So the whole idea is that I will take a back seat and help supervise and come in when needed. But the weekend to weekend running of classes is going to be done by my colleague now. Yes.
Nice. It's always nice to be, as life evolves, to be able to step away and see things, that you help it sort of continue on. That's for me at least, has always been a fantastic feeling. Well, fantastic. I mean, so this has been a great chat. As I've mentioned a few times, the whole time we were talking about documentation, I was just kind of browsing through the Node docs, just getting more and more depressed how bad they are. Hopefully we'll get a little bit of inspiration to fix it.
By the way, the most important piece of the Node docs, if you are looking at listening to this podcast, are not in the docs, are in the guides. Okay? Now, Look at the guides. The guides will actually explain you how to use Node. The docs, they don't.
And the guides are buried in the...
No, they're also on the website, if you know where to pick them.
The docs.
They are. Okay.
Oh, they are on the website? Yeah.
Actually, I recall, I'll just put this also as a form of encouragement. I recall, maybe this was a year or two ago, I was actually looking for some specific headers in the request object, and I discovered that the authority and the scheme headers were actually not documented. And I made a pull request to actually add those because for what I was doing at that time, I needed it. And this is something I try to encourage my students as well. If you go to find something and you don't see it, try to open an issue, especially if it's a documentation related thing. Try to open an issue and put it out there. Make a pull request, add this piece of information that you tried to find but couldn't get, and get it merged in. I have helped in projects that are quite huge, in my opinion. I still, when people ask me what's your proudest software development moment, I keep on saying that the best one was getting my documentation pull request merged into Node.
Nice. Well, yeah, that's fantastic. I love seeing all this, particularly doc contributions from the community. I think are always super valuable. And I will say, if anyone's listening, that if you're wondering how you can contribute to a significant open source project like Node, docs are an amazing place to start in such a undervalued. It's undervalued where it should be, right? It's something that is tremendously valuable. Well, thank you, Kenigbolo. This has been an absolute fantastic conversation. We are coming up at the end of our time right now. So just want to thank you. I don't know if Matteo, if you have any final questions or thoughts.
No, I'm pretty good. I think it's been a fantastic chat. I can't wait for this to be published and for all of you to listen to it. So hey, this is really meta, by the way. So you will listen to it when it's published. So hey,
and just for a reminder for folks, our episodes for OpenHive.JS are being published on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You can also find other places to listen if you go to Anchor FM and search for OpenHive.JS. You can find us there. Thank you, Kenigbolo, for a fantastic conversation, and thanks everyone else for listening.
This has been another episode of OpenHive.JS, the podcast for all things JavaScript. Be sure to subscribe to OpenHive.JS on your favorite podcast player. Join us next time for more insights and opinions from the open source and JavaScript communities. Until then, I'm Matteo. Thanks for listening.